In this question, we're given a geometrical shape. In this case, it's a prism. And we're told a few things about it. We're told that it has an equilateral triangle. That means that these sides are all equal. And it has a length of L. And we're given that the volume is 2000. And the first question asks for an expression of L, so L in terms of x. So it's asking us to show that L equals that. So we need to look at the volume of the prism. So if we remember that a prism is a sort of cylinder where the volume is equal to the area of the cross-section. In this case, it's a triangle. This is the cross-sectional area of the prism multiplied by the length. So if we remember that this is the length and this is what we're trying to find. We're trying to find an expression for the length. Okay, so that we know that this volume is equal to 2000. So that's our starting point. Now we need to rewrite A in terms of x. So looking at this triangle, we know it's an equilateral triangle. That means these sides are equal. But that also means that these angles are equal. And because the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180 degrees, then we have theta plus theta plus theta equals 180 degrees. So theta has to be equal to 60 degrees. So in an equilateral triangle, the angle is 60. And the area of a triangle, remember, is half AB sine C. So in this case, it would be half x squared sine 60. Because each of these sides is x. So we've got x, x, and x. So half x squared sine 60. And sine 60, if you put it in your calculator, is square root of 3 over 2. So that gives us square root of 3x squared over 4. So that's our value for the area of the triangle. So we can put that in there. So we can say square root of 3x squared times L over 4 equals 2000. So we're very close to be able to do that. We're probably just one step away. All we need is to rearrange this to find L. So to rearrange an expression like that, you would multiply both sides by 4. So that will give you 8,000. And then you divide by 3x squared. So L would give me 8,000 divided by root 3x squared. And that's exactly what they asked us to find there. So that's part A done. Part B says, show that the expression for the surface area is that. And when they say hence, it means using this. Now, the good thing about this question, even though it's fairly difficult, even if you didn't do this, even if you failed to do this, you can still use this to do part B. So you can do part B even if you don't do part A. And you can probably do part C even if you don't do A and B. So don't worry if you get stuck on the first step. So the surface area of a prism, if you look at the prism, how many faces does it have? It has one face here, it has the second at the back, and then it's got this face, and the bottom. So it's got 5 faces. So I would probably write this something like this. So area equals 2 triangles and 3 rectangles. Okay, so the rectangles, that's these faces here. There are 3 rectangles and they all have the same size. Each of these rectangles has the same dimensions, L times X. So the rectangles are each L times X. And the triangles we've already established are root 3x squared over 4. So if you multiply that by 2, that'll give you root 3x squared over 2. So that's my expression for A. Does that look like that? No, because here there is no L, whereas here we have an L. And that's why they said hence. That means using this expression, we can replace what we found previously for L, we can replace our L with that. So we can say A equals root 3 over 2 x squared plus 3 times 8,000 over root 3 x squared times x. So that's my L, and that's that x there. So I'll just highlight this so it's clear that this is my L. So now we just need to simplify this to make it look like that. So that will give me root 3 over 2 x squared plus, it looks like this x will cancel with one of those, and then you've got 3 times 8,000 over root 3 x. Now 3 over root 3, you can rationalize that to make it root 3. So 3 over root 3, if you multiply the numerator and denominator by root 3, that'll give you root 3 over 3, and that will just give you root 3. So I can replace that with root 3. So that will give me root 3 over 2 x squared plus 8,000 root 3 over x. Okay, so I can take root 3 over 2 common. It's a common factor because that's what they did in the question. And that'll give me x squared plus, so I've got root 3 there, but I don't have divide by 2. So I'd need to multiply this by 2. So 16,000 over x. And if you check that, if you multiply this by this, you'll get that. And if you multiply this by this, you'll get that. So that looks like my expression, and that's exactly what we have here. So that's the correct answer for part B. Now the question then goes on to ask for a stationary point. Now the stationary point is where dA by dx is going to be equal to 0. That's the definition of your stationary point. And again, even if you fail to do this, you can still do part C. You can use this information to do part C even if you didn't manage to get part B done. So let's clear some space here. This is my expression for A. And what I want to do is to differentiate that. Oops. I want to differentiate A to find dA by dx. Okay, so I'm going to multiply those out again because it'll be easier that way. So root 3 over 2x squared plus 8,000 root 3 x to the minus 1. So x in the denominator I can write as x to the minus 1. That's going to make it easier to differentiate. So dA by dx, you multiply by that power. So it's root 3 times x, because you're going to subtract 1 from the power, minus 8,000 root 3 x to the minus 2. So I multiplied by minus 1, and then I subtracted 1. And that has to be equal to 0. Now, this is a strange kind of expression because we've got x to the minus 2. So if you rewrite this as x squared in the denominator, so if you bring this down there and remove the negative sign, it's now slightly more familiar. Almost looks like a quadratic function, but it isn't. So whenever you have something in the denominator, to eliminate that, to get rid of that, you multiply both sides by that denominator. So as long as x isn't 0, you're allowed to do that. So multiply by x squared. So that gives you root 3x cubed minus 8,000 root 3 equals 0. So I can move that, just rearrange, so x cubed equals 8,000. So I've divided both sides by root 3. So x is the cube root of 8,000. So the cube root of 1,000 is 10, the cube root of 8 is 2, so it looks like x is equal to 20. Now, because we're dealing with centimeters here, and centimeter cubed, this will be 20 centimeters. So that will be the answer to the exact value of x at the stationary point. Okay, so whenever you have a stationary point, you always answer that by saying that the derivative, the first derivative, is equal to 0. In this case, dA by dx. So we solved that, and we ended up with so x equals 20. They said, find the corresponding value of L. Well, we have an expression for L. So we know L in terms of x. So it's just a case of substituting. So we can say L is 8,000 divided by 20 squared times root 3. Put that in a calculator. And because they're saying they want the exact value, that means you need to keep the surd in there. So rather than putting it in a calculator, you would just divide 8,000 by 20 squared, which is 400. So that will give you, let me make some space. So that will give you 20 divided by root 3. Okay, so that's the exact value. So whenever you see the word exact, that means you need to keep the surds, keep pi, if there's a pi in there, keep any exponentials, you need to keep any fractions. If there's any logs, you need to keep those. So that is the answer to part D. The question goes on to say, well, now you know L and you know X, find A. Now we have an expression for A too, so really these are easy marks because you just need to plug in the numbers that you've already found. So that's my formula for A. I just need to substitute. And again, it's saying the exact value, so we need to make sure we don't calculate that with the root 3. We need to keep the surd separate. So if you calculate all of this, that gives you 1,200. So it's root 3 over 2 times 1,200. Now 1,200 divided by 2 is 600. So you can just say 600 root 3. And the unit will be centimeter squared because it's area. Now make sure you don't put the root 3 in your calculator because then you won't get an exact value. They're asking for an exact value. The question goes on to say, show that this value you found is a minimum as opposed to a maximum. So remember, to show that something is a minimum, you need to show two things, that dA by dx equals 0, and the second derivative of x is positive. So we've already done that. Now we need to do that. So we need to take the second derivative of x. So if we go back and find the derivative, if I erase that, maybe we need to do that again. So I'm gonna copy that And let's differentiate again. So that's a. The first derivative, let's call it a dash, is going to be root 3x minus 8,000 root 3x to the minus 2. And the second derivative is equal to root 3 plus 16,000 root 3x to the minus 3. And now what we do is we substitute here, we insert the value we found, which was 20, and we see whether this is a positive number or a negative number. I mean, it is clearly a positive number because that's positive and that's positive and that's positive, but let's actually find what that value is. It doesn't need to be exact this time because we're just looking at the sign. We're only interested in whether it's positive or negative. So that gives you 5.2, and that is greater than 0. That's the important bit. And then you can say second derivative a greater than 0, therefore value of a is a minimum. Okay, so when the second derivative is positive, the value you find for a, or in general y, your function, will be a local minimum. So that's the final part of this 12-mark question. I hope you found this helpful. You need to know how to find the area of a triangle and the volume of a prism. I don't think these formulas are given to you, so there's a little bit of geometric knowledge here. But even if you don't get part A or B, you can still work on parts C, D, E, and F. So I hope you found that helpful.